Well, now to hear more about his experiences firsthand, joining me in the studio is Xu Dezhi. Xu, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I know you've been in Syria for about 2 years now. Can you tell us about some of the changes you've seen there in the last 2 years?
Well, if we speak of changes in Damascus, obviously it's safer because the main threat for Damascus is actually mortar bombs. But in the beginning of this year, Syrian government regained control of Ghouta, which is the place, mainly the source of those mortar bombs. But if we look at the bigger picture, for the past 2 years, the biggest change for me, I think, is the collapse of ISIL. Because when I arrived in Syria in 2016, ISIL still control more than 50% of Syrian lands, especially in the desert areas. But now they only have like several positions remain in the desert. But that being said, there are still something remaining the same in Syria, which is divided country, because there are still so many parts, so many militias and troops. They control different areas. So this is actually difficult. We predicted that, according to our analysis, this crisis probably won't have that large-scale military operations probably in the future, but for some small skirmishes in Syria, or just like what we saw, those big suicide bombings, that would still happen. The big thing is, even though it's like that, this crisis is even more complicated, because now all the parties that participate in Syrian crisis, they don't have any intention, seems they don't have any intention to really pull back. And nowadays, Israel and Iran, they played a more active role actually in Syria. This actually makes the things even more complicated and sophisticated.
We saw some clips from some of your reports there in Syria where there were explosions and live fire going off behind you. As a reporter based in a conflict zone, for us, watching on TV, it's kind of hard to imagine. But what's really stood out the most for you in these 2 years?
Well, the most scary moment is the moment that you cannot see the danger. So I particularly remember last November when Syrian government announced that they actually controlled a border town called Ab Kamal, which is near the Iraqi borders from ISIL. We just traveled there and to cover the news. And then it turns out ISIL struck back, and in a very big scale. So we have to go there, but we still have to keep ourselves like 3 kilometers away from the city in the position. And it turns out that night, ISIL cut our only supply road back to Damascus. So our plan is to go back to Damascus on the same day, but it's impossible that moment. So we have to stay in that position for 14 hours. In the whole night, we can hear those rocket launcher, because it's very clear, it's very close to us, because we were just in that position. And what worried me most that time is actually you don't know the terrorists. You don't know where they are. Probably they were just like 200 meters away from you. So that kind of uncertainty makes me feel very scary, and that's probably the most dangerous or impressive moment I have ever been experienced in Syria.
Interesting. Well, you're a reporter, so you go to Syria from China as an observer to bring these images back to us here around the world. But what about local people who call Syria home? How do you think this war and the conflict has affected them?
Well, frankly speaking, I talk to many Syrians. Now they don't really care who wins the crisis. They just want the war to stop, because it's devastating. And well, I've been to so many shelter schools. Just like I mentioned, East Ghouta, there are more than 100,000 people evacuated from that area and went to some shelter schools. The situation of those shelter schools or centers, they are really bad. Let me give you some examples. They have only public toilets. You have to queue up more than 30 minutes to go to the toilet, and there are medical vans in those centers, but for those people who need doctors or who need medicine, they went there. They need to also queue up for about 1 hour to reach the doctor or to get the drugs they need. And another thing is actually because of this 7 years long war or crisis, this country now have like 80% of civilians. They actually live in poverty according to a UN standard, and this is really bad for them.
Certainly something many of us can't understand, but we really appreciate that you go and live there and bring these images back to us so we can better understand. Xu Dezhi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel.